The hall of the Alpha King stretched like a shadow across the land, tall and dark, with walls carved from black stone that seemed to drink the light of the torches. The air was heavy, scented with the cold smoke of burning incense and the faint tang of iron. Every step the woman took echoed, a soft drum against the silence, until she knelt at the center of the room, her head bowed and hands folded. Her heart pounded like a war drum, each beat a mix of fear and defiance. She had heard tales of the Alpha King, whispered in frightened voices across villages and kingdoms. They spoke of his unmatched strength, his cruel justice, and the dark magic he wielded over the land. Yet none had prepared her for the way he filled the space, as if the shadows themselves answered to him. He stood at the raised dais, tall, cloaked in midnight robes, embroidered with threads of silver that shimmered like frozen stars. His eyes, sharp and calculating, held the weight of centuries and a quiet, terrifying authority. Her mind refused to bend to awe or terror. She had come for one reason, and one reason only: to see her mate. But as her eyes flicked to the shadow beside the king, she froze. Her breath caught in her throat, and the air seemed to tremble. He was alive, or at least, his body was. Kneeling, silent, and bound by chains of magic that glimmered faintly like cold fire. He was a shell of the man she had loved. His eyes, once bright and full of laughter, were hollow, and yet for a moment, they flickered toward her. That tiny spark, almost invisible, struck her like a dagger. Her mate, alive, but not free. The Alpha King's voice broke the silence. It was low, rich, and commanding, each word a blade that cut through the tension of the hall. "You kneel," he said, stepping closer, his boots clicking against the stone floor. "Do you kneel for me, or do you kneel for him?" The woman's heart clenched. She dared not move her head. She could not. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them harder against her knees. She did not kneel for him, but she could not deny the strange pull of fear and curiosity that held her in place. The king circled her slowly, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. "Do not hide your thoughts. I can feel them, as I feel the heartbeat of every soul in my kingdom. Tell me what binds you here." She swallowed hard. Every word she could speak was trapped behind a wall of grief and fury. Her mate had died, or so she had believed, and now, to see him kneeling in chains, as if nothing of his former self remained. It was agony and disbelief tangled together. She began, but her voice faltered. She could not bring herself to call him by name in this cursed place. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, as if the pain could anchor her in reality. The king's eyes glinted, a sharp edge of amusement cutting through the darkness. Silence. The strongest form of defiance. He paused, then spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper meant to draw her in. "You feel something for him, do you not? Something that refuses to obey my will." Her heart lurched, and she felt the heat rise to her cheeks. The truth was undeniable, even if she could not voice it. She loved him still, and that love was her strength and her danger. The Alpha King's presence seemed to expand, filling the room with a subtle pressure that pressed against her chest. "And yet, you kneel before me. Why?" She finally spoke, her voice steady though it trembled in the stillness. "Because I must survive." He nodded slowly, almost approvingly, though his eyes never left hers. "Good. Then you understand the first lesson of my hall. Loyalty is not born of love. It is earned through fear, endurance, and choice." Her mate shifted slightly, the chains around his wrists and ankles whispering against the stone floor. Even as his body obeyed the king's will, she could see the faintest defiance flickering in his eyes. That small spark gave her hope, but it also tore her heart into pieces. How could she reach him? How could she save him without losing herself in the process? The king's gaze fell to the bound man, lingering with an intensity that made the woman's stomach twist. "He serves now," the king said, "a reminder to all who challenge my dominion. Yet, I sense that he still clings to a fragment of his former self. Dangerous. Intriguing." The woman's pulse quickened. danger, and intrigue. She knew that feeling. It had lived inside her from the moment she realized her mate was lost, and yet still alive. Chained in this throne room of shadows, you have a choice, the king continued, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. Serve me willingly, or be broken. The path to freedom is narrow and twisted, and few walk it without leaving pieces of themselves behind. She drew in a slow, steadying breath. Freedom. Her mate. Survival. Each word held its own weight, pressing on her chest, as if the air itself were thick with consequences. Her eyes flicked again to the bound figure kneeling beside the king. For a fleeting moment, she imagined breaking the chains herself, storming the hall, challenging the king's power with nothing but sheer determination. The thought was intoxicating, but dangerous. He would crush her without hesitation. And yet, she could not let him remain as he was. The king's shadow fell across her hands as he stopped beside her. His presence was suffocating, yet there was a strange magnetic pull she could not resist. He leaned slightly closer, the sharp scent of cedar and smoke enveloping her senses. You have fire, he said softly, almost admiringly. But fire alone does not win battles. Control it. Shape it. Or it will consume you. She forced herself to lower her gaze, keeping her composure. The fire within her roared, but she had learned the art of hiding strength behind a mask of obedience. For now, that mask was her only armor. The king's eyes lingered on her for a long moment before he turned back to the bound man. You see, he said, voice resonant and chilling. Even in the presence of death, even when the past seems buried, the heart does not forget. It clings. It struggles. It fights. Her mate's head tilted slightly, a subtle gesture of recognition, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. He was alive. Not free. Not yet. But alive. And somehow, that knowledge was a seed of hope that took root deep in her heart. The king's smile was thin, almost imperceptible. Yet it carried a warning sharper than any blade. The choice you make now, he said, will echo through the rest of your days. Every action has its shadow. Every decision its price. Will you kneel because you fear me? Or because you hope to save him? The woman's chest tightened. The weight of the question pressed down, heavier than the stone beneath her knees. She could not speak, for any word might betray her thoughts, her fears, her plans. She only bowed lower, letting the silence answer. The king circled the dais slowly, steps echoing like a heartbeat in the cavernous hall. Very well, he said at last, voice carrying over the hush of the room. You will learn. In time you will understand the meaning of service, of power, and of love entwined with duty. Her mate's chains rattled faintly, a tiny sound that made her pulse spike. He had moved again. Subtle, cautious, a silent reminder that his spirit had not yet been extinguished. The king's gaze returned to her, piercing and unreadable. Tonight, he whispered, almost to himself, you will kneel for more than obedience. You will kneel for a test, and by morning, one of you may no longer be the same. The woman's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to argue, to refuse, but she could not. Her fate, her mate's fate, and the shadowed paths of the kingdom all hung on the edge of a knife. She bowed deeper, heart heavy but burning with determination. In the silence that followed, the torches flickered, and the hall seemed to breathe around them, alive with whispers of ancient curses, hidden magic, and promises of danger. And then, just as the first hint of fear threatened to overwhelm her, she glimpsed her mate's eyes one last time, a spark, a silent plea. Her mind made a vow. She would not let him remain a slave. Not to this king. Not to this magic. Not ever. The Alpha King's voice cut through the air again, smooth as silk and sharp as a dagger. Sleep tonight with your mind alert, he said. For tomorrow, the first lesson will begin. And remember, nothing in my hall is as it seems. The woman swallowed hard, her pulse a drum of both dread and defiance. She had entered the hall kneeling, bound by fear and obligation. But the moment her mate's gaze had met hers, something inside had shifted. She would fight, she would survive, and she would reclaim what had been stolen from them both. The doors to the hall closed with a resonant clang, sealing them in the shadows, and the woman understood that the journey ahead would be perilous. Dark magic, impossible power, and the Alpha King's inscrutable mind awaited her. And yet, in the pit of her chest, a fire burned. A fire that whispered one word, over and over. Freedom. The night in the Alpha King's hall was endless. Shadows draped over the walls like heavy curtains, and the flickering torches cast shapes that danced across the cold stone. The woman had been given a chamber nearby, not a prison, but not freedom either. A place meant to keep her close, under watch, where the king's eyes might still find her in the dark. She could hear her mate's faint movements even through the thick walls of the castle. The sound of chains shifting softly, the scrape of boots on stone, reminded her that he was alive, though enslaved. She pressed her hands against the door, heart aching. She longed to be near him, to hold his hand, to whisper that she had not abandoned him, but she dared not. The Alpha King's magic was a shadow over every step she took. One wrong move, one falter in her composure, and he would know. Morning came like a slow, reluctant sigh. The hall was quiet, except for the soft murmur of attendants preparing for the king's audience. She knelt at the appointed place as the king entered, his robes brushing the floor, eyes like steel over coal. Her back stiffened instinctively. She did not yet trust herself to stand freely in his presence. "Today begins your true lesson," the king said, voice calm, like the surface of a still lake, hiding dangerous currents beneath. "You will serve, observe, and learn. And perhaps you will find where your heart truly belongs." Her chest tightened. His words were not a command but a challenge, one that struck at her very core. She did not know if he spoke of loyalty to him, or to her mate, or to herself. She was led to the hall where her mate worked. He knelt at the edge of a great chamber, performing menial tasks with the precision of one who had been trained to obey. His shoulders were tense, his movements careful. He did not meet her eyes at first, perhaps fearing the stirrings of hope that might betray him to the king's watchful gaze. When her gaze finally met his, she felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. He was alive, but he was changed. The gentle warmth she had loved in his smile had been muted, replaced by a quiet, desperate control. He was still there, but part of him was hidden behind chains, hidden behind fear. The king entered, his presence filling the room. Every head turned instinctively. He moved among his servants with a calm authority that brooked no opposition. And then, he stopped before her. "You see him," he said, voice low and resonant. "The one you love. He is yours no longer, and yet perhaps he still belongs to you. Observe, learn, and consider what that means." Her fingers clenched at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to step forward, to demand his release. But she knew better. She had to understand the king's power before she could hope to challenge it. "Obedience," the king continued, "is not merely a matter of force. It is a test of heart, mind, and will. You may kneel because you fear, or because you choose. That choice shapes destiny." The woman knelt quietly, watching her mate as he obeyed. Each task he performed was an echo of the man she knew, yet shadowed by something darker. He paused for a moment, and their eyes met briefly. In that fleeting glance, a flicker of recognition passed a silent promise that he had not forgotten her. The day passed in a blur of tasks, observation, and subtle lessons. The king allowed her to approach her mate only under strict supervision. Even the smallest act of kindness, the briefest touch of her hand, was measured against his scrutiny. She had to learn restraint, patience, and the careful art of concealment. At midday, she was sent to the library, a cavernous room filled with ancient tomes and scrolls. Here, she studied the history of the king's rule, the origins of the curses that bound the land, and the strange magic that had enslaved her mate. The knowledge weighed heavily on her, each page a reminder of the power she was up against. Yet within those dusty volumes, she found hints of hope, ancient rites and rituals that could weaken the magic if performed with courage and precision. As the sun set, painting the hall in shades of crimson and gold, she was brought back to the central chamber. The king stood waiting, as always, his figure casting a long shadow across the stone floor. "You are learning," he said. "But learning is only the beginning. True understanding comes when the heart is tested." He gestured to her mate, who knelt silently. "He is yours to observe, and perhaps yours to guide. If you can endure the lesson without faltering." The woman stepped closer, careful to maintain the proper posture of obedience. Her mate's eyes met hers again, and this time, the spark in his gaze was stronger. She could almost hear his silent plea, "Do not give up, do not let them win." That night, when the hall fell silent and the torches cast long shadows, the king left them alone. The woman finally dared to approach her mate, kneeling beside him, as she whispered softly, "You are still here," she said. "Still fighting. I can see it. I will find a way to free you." His eyes glimmered faintly. He could not speak, bound as he was by the magic, but the gratitude and hope in that look reached her heart like a lifeline. "Do not speak," she said quietly. "Do not let the king hear. He will destroy what little freedom you still have." They shared the silence, each drawing strength from the other. And yet, the threat of the king's power lingered like a storm on the horizon. She knew that every small act of hope could be extinguished with a single word, a single command. The following days were a test of endurance. She learned to read her mate's subtle gestures, to understand the language of glances and half-hidden movements. She began to anticipate his needs without words, offering water, a slight adjustment of his chains when the king was not watching, and silent encouragement. Each act was dangerous, but necessary. The king, ever observant, noted her growing skill and courage. He walked past her one day, his gaze sharp. "You are clever," he said. "Cleverness is a double-edged sword. Use it wisely, or it will cut you." She bowed her head, hiding her thoughts. Every word, every glance, every action was now part of a delicate game, one where the wrong move could destroy everything. One evening, as the sky outside burned with the red and gold of sunset, her mate moved subtly, pressing his hand against hers ever so slightly. It was a fleeting touch, but it was enough to make her heart leap. He was still present, still himself in the smallest ways. The king entered suddenly, his eyes narrowing. "Ah," he said, voice smooth and dangerous. "A small rebellion of the heart. Dangerous and intriguing." Her pulse quickened, and she pulled her hand away swiftly. The king's eyes held a sharp curiosity, as if he could see every thought that flickered behind her eyes. "You feel loyalty to him," the king said softly, almost a whisper. "And yet, you kneel for me. Interesting." The woman swallowed hard. There was no lying here. Her mind raced for an answer. Some explanation that would protect them both. "Because I must survive," she said finally, voice steady despite the fear that twisted her stomach. The king's lips curved slightly, a hint of a smile. "Good. Survival is the first step. The next is choice." He left the chamber, leaving the two of them in silence once more. The woman exhaled slowly, letting herself relax just a little. She knelt beside her mate again, studying his face in the dim light. The spark of life in his eyes was stronger now, and she knew that if they could endure, if they could remain patient, they might yet find a way to break the chains. "That night," she whispered once more, her words a promise to herself and to him, "I will not let them take you. I will not let the darkness win." Her mate's eyes shimmered faintly with what seemed like understanding, and she pressed a hand lightly against his. Outside, the wind whispered through the castle towers, carrying with it the faint scent of storms to come. The Alpha King's presence lingered in every shadow, and the magic that bound her mate pulsed quietly, like a heartbeat waiting to be challenged. The woman rose, determination settling into her bones. She had survived the day. She had learned the first lessons, and in the quiet of the night, she made a vow that no curse, no magic, no king's will could ever destroy. She would fight, she would endure, and she would reclaim what had been taken. The days had grown heavier in the Alpha King's hall, each one a test of patience, courage, and wit. The woman had learned to move carefully, to balance obedience with subtle defiance, and to read the faintest flickers of her mate's spirit as he struggled under the chains that bound him. The castle itself seemed alive, walls whispering secrets and shadows shifting with every passing hour. It was in the library, among ancient tomes and scrolls, that she discovered a possibility, a faint, almost forgotten ritual that could weaken the chains controlling her mate. The instructions were vague, hidden among countless pages of prophecy and curse. The ritual required not only skill and courage but also trust and connection between those bound by magic. The thought ignited a spark within her. Perhaps there was a way to bring him back, but the ritual carried risk. The magic in the king's hall was ancient, dangerous, and unpredictable. One wrong move, and it could backfire, strengthening the chains, or worse, harming her mate permanently. Her mind spun with possibilities and fears. Could she rely on the king, or would he see her actions as rebellion? Could she trust herself not to falter under his watchful eyes? The next morning, she was summoned to the central hall. The king stood at the dais, arms crossed, eyes piercing. His presence was magnetic, commanding, and utterly impossible to ignore. She knelt as always, but this time, she felt a subtle shift within herself, a growing strength, the confidence of one who had begun to understand the rules of this dark game. "You have been diligent," he said, voice smooth like polished stone. But diligence alone does not save hearts. Courage, intelligence, and understanding of power, these are what matter. She met his gaze, steady and controlled. She knew that beneath his imposing exterior, the king was testing her, probing her intentions. She did not fear him, at least. Not as she had before. Fear was now tempered by purpose. He gestured to her mate, kneeling silently as always. "He is yours to watch," the king said. "Yet he belongs to me as long as the chains hold. You may guide him, if you dare. But know this: the line between freedom and chaos is thin." Her heart ached as she approached him. Each step was careful, measured, yet her mind raced with plans. She studied the chains, tracing the faint glow of the magic that bound him, memorizing every detail. If there was a way to weaken them, she would find it. That evening, under the dim light of flickering torches, she began to attempt the ritual in secret. Her hands hovered over the chains, reciting the words she had memorized, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of magic. The air seemed to hum with tension, thick and electric, as if the castle itself was aware of her intentions. Her mate's eyes flickered with recognition, a small spark of hope shining through the control imposed upon him. For a brief moment, she imagined the chains shattering, the magic unraveling, and him looking at her freely, without the shadow of slavery clouding his gaze. That fleeting vision filled her with warmth and determination. But the Alpha King entered suddenly, as always seeming to appear out of the shadows. His presence made the torches flicker violently, casting the room in erratic light. He stepped forward, eyes sharp, watching her every motion. "You tamper with forces you barely understand," he said calmly, though his tone carried the weight of a threat. "And yet, I see the fire in your heart. Intriguing, dangerous, admirable." Her breath caught, but she held her ground. "I only wish to restore what has been taken," she said, voice steady despite the fear that trembled in her chest. The king's gaze softened for a fleeting second, so briefly she wondered if she had imagined it. Then he straightened, restoring the mask of authority and menace. "Power has many faces," he said, "and you are learning to see them all. But remember, desire and duty are not always aligned. A choice must be made, and choices leave scars." She nodded silently, returning her focus to her mate. She began the ritual again, careful, precise, guided by hope and the faintest flicker of his resistance. Slowly, subtly, the chains shimmered differently, the magic seeming to falter, just slightly. Her heart leapt. There was progress. Her mate shifted ever so slightly, a motion imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention, but enough to give her courage. The spark of his true self was growing. He was not lost, not entirely. Days passed like this, a dangerous game of hidden rituals and careful observation. Each attempt brought them closer, their silent connection deepening. The woman found herself relying not only on her skill but on intuition, reading the faintest signals of her mate's thoughts, his desires, his struggles. Every glance, every subtle movement, was a conversation they could share in a language the king could not fully understand. The Alpha King observed quietly, his presence both oppressive and strangely compelling. He spoke less, yet every word carried weight, a lesson in subtle power and control. Sometimes he would approach during the ritual, standing silently in the shadows, watching her work. She would meet his gaze, and a strange tension would pulse in the room. Fear, curiosity, and something unspoken she could not name filled the air. "You are brave," the king said one evening, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Bravery can save lives, or destroy them. Choose wisely." Her mate's eyes met hers during that moment, and she saw a flicker of hope stronger than ever. She knew that the ritual was nearing completion, but the danger had also grown. One misstep, one hesitation, could undo everything. Then, the unthinkable happened. A surge of magic, wild and untamed, rippled through the hall. The chains binding her mate shivered violently, glowing with a fierce, uncontrollable light. The king's eyes narrowed. "You pushed too far, little flame," he said, voice smooth but cold. "Do you understand the consequences?" She clenched her fists, determined. "I will not stop," she said. "Not until he is free." The chains rattled and glowed brighter, and for a heartbeat, the spell faltered. Her mate's hands trembled, and his eyes shone with the first hint of true defiance in months. He moved slightly toward her, and for a fleeting moment, the air between them was charged with a promise of liberation. But the king stepped forward, and the chains snapped back into place. The glow dimmed, and the magic tightened again. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and the power in his presence made her knees weak. "The heart is strong," he said softly, almost kindly, "but power is stronger. Remember this, if you wish to succeed." Her mind raced. The ritual had shown promise, but it was incomplete. She understood now that freeing him would require not only courage and skill, but also trust. Trust in herself, in her mate, and even, in a strange way, in the Alpha King's unspoken lessons. That night, she knelt beside her mate, whispering words of encouragement. "We are close," she said softly. "The chains weaken. I can feel it. Hold on. Just a little longer." He met her gaze, and the flicker of his true self glimmered more brightly than ever. The chains clinked softly as if protesting their weakening grip, but they did not hold him entirely. Outside, the wind howled through the castle towers, carrying with it the promise of storms to come. The magic in the hall pulsed like a living thing, aware of the woman's attempts to challenge it, aware of the growing bond between her and her mate. She rose, determination settling deep in her bones. She knew that the final step would be the most dangerous, the moment when courage, love, and careful planning would collide. The Alpha King had given them glimpses of freedom, yes, but he had also reminded them that every choice carried risk. Her mind returned to the king's words. "The heart is strong, but power is stronger." She understood now that the struggle was not just against the magic or the chains, but against the king's understanding of fear and control. To succeed, she would need to rise above not just the curse, but the very nature of power itself. And in the shadows of the hall, her mate's eyes held a question, a silent plea. "Do you have the strength to save me? To save us both?" She knelt beside him one last time before retreating to her chamber. "I will," she whispered. I promise. We will be free, together. The wind rattled the castle windows, carrying an ominous whisper. The Alpha King was watching. The chains were still alive. And the final test was approaching. The dawn came like a pale promise, spilling silver light through the tall windows of the Alpha King's hall. The woman rose quietly, heart heavy yet determined. Today was the day. Today she would attempt the final step of the ritual that could free her mate from the chains that bound him so cruelly. She had spent days preparing, learning the rhythm of the magic, reading the faint whispers of the castle walls, and studying every subtle movement of her mate under the king's watchful eyes. Her mate knelt silently in the central chamber, chains faintly glowing, the magic pulsing like a heartbeat. He looked toward her, a flicker of hope and trust shining through his restrained eyes. For the first time in months, she felt that the possibility of freedom was real. The Alpha King appeared, as always, his presence filling the room before he even stepped fully into the light. He studied them both, his sharp gaze measuring, weighing. The final step, he said softly, is always the hardest. The power you face is not mine alone. It is old, primal, and it does not forgive mistakes. She bowed her head, acknowledging the warning but not fear. I understand, she said. I will not fail. He nodded slowly, a subtle approval that both unsettled and encouraged her. The king had been observing her courage and skill all along. For the first time, she understood that he had never underestimated her. He had tested her, sharpened her, preparing her for this moment. The ritual began. The woman chanted softly, her words flowing like a song only she and her mate could hear. Her hands moved over the glowing chains, feeling the pulse of the magic and guiding it carefully, coaxing it, weakening it, without breaking the delicate balance. The castle seemed to hold its breath, shadows stretching and flickering with the rhythm of her words. Her mate's chains trembled and flickered, responding to her touch and voice. For the first time, he moved more freely, his body flexing slightly as the magic weakened. His eyes met hers. And in that gaze, she saw the man she loved, the man who had endured, who had resisted, who had not yet been consumed by the darkness. But the Alpha King's presence reminded her of the risk. He stepped closer, silent, yet commanding. Do you think you can undo what I have built? He asked softly, voice smooth like stone. The chains are old, the magic is strong. One mistake, and you could destroy everything. Her pulse quickened, but she did not falter. I will try, she said, because he deserves freedom. The chains shimmered, glowing brighter for a moment, then pulsed violently, reacting to her determination. Her mate gasped softly, the first sound he had made in months. The flicker of hope in his eyes grew stronger. The king watched silently, his expression unreadable, though a hint of curiosity and something more subtle respect lingered in his gaze. Power is not only in strength, he said, almost to himself. It is in the heart that wields it. The woman felt the rhythm of the magic change beneath her hands. The chains were weakening, responding to her courage and will. She pressed forward, every word, every motion precise. The glow dimmed slightly, signaling the final stage of the ritual. Her mate shifted, the chains no longer holding him completely. He rose slowly on his knees, head high, eyes locking with hers. There was no fear now, only trust, and the faintest spark of defiance. Then, the unexpected happened. The king's hand rose, not as an attack, but as a test. The final choice is yours, he said, his voice calm, almost mesmerizing. To free him completely, you must decide what you are willing to sacrifice. And remember, power does not forgive hesitation. Her heart froze for a heartbeat. Sacrifice. She understood immediately. To release the chains fully, she might have to risk herself, her safety, or even the delicate balance that kept them both alive. She glanced at her mate. His trust in her was absolute, unwavering. Even though he was still bound by magic, she took a deep breath, centering herself. "I will do it," she said. "I will face whatever is necessary." The ritual intensified. The chains glowed fiercely, resisting and bending under her will. Her hands moved faster, guided by determination and love. Every fiber of her being focused on freeing him. She whispered his name, grounding the magic in their bond, in the shared history of hope, struggle, and endurance. Her mate's eyes shone brighter than ever, his body trembling as the chains weakened further. The glow began to fade, as though the magic itself acknowledged her courage. But then, a surge of the ancient spell lashed out, pulling at both of them, threatening to overwhelm their strength. The king stepped forward, not to interfere, but to observe. "Do not falter," he said softly. "Do not let fear guide your hands." She closed her eyes briefly, taking his words as a shield and a reminder. When she opened them, she felt something extraordinary. The chains were no longer just metal or magic. They were a reflection of fear, control, and doubt. If she could let go of those shadows, the chains would break. Her heart surged with clarity. She channeled all her love, courage, and defiance into the magic, into the ritual, into the very air that surrounded them. The chains trembled violently, then shattered, their fragments dissolving into a soft, silver mist. Her mate rose fully, free for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He stood before her, eyes bright with life, awe, and gratitude. The woman reached for him, and he took her hands, holding them as if anchoring himself to reality, to hope, to her. For a brief moment, there was only them, the hall, the king, the broken chains, and the quiet pulse of magic, settling into stillness. The Alpha King stepped forward, his cloak sweeping the floor. He looked at them both, expression unreadable, but his eyes held something softer, almost reflective. "You have done what few could even attempt," he said. "And yet, the world outside these walls will not wait. The shadows may be broken, but they linger. Remember that freedom is not given, it is claimed, every day." Her mate squeezed her hands. "We are free," he said, voice steady, emotion threading through each word. "Because of you, and because of us." The woman's heart swelled, yet she felt a weight lingering and understanding that their journey was not over. The chains were gone, but the lessons, the scars, and the memory of the king's power would remain with them. The king turned, moving toward the dais. "You have proven that courage and love can challenge even the oldest magic," he said. "But the heart is still a battlefield. Do not forget that one choice can shape all that follows." She watched him, understanding finally what he had meant all along. He had not sought to destroy them, nor had he simply been a tyrant. He had been a test, a measure of what the heart could endure and achieve, and in his own way, he had guided them to their strength. Her mate leaned close, whispering, "We did it. We're together again." She nodded, tears spilling freely. "And we will face whatever comes next. Together. Always." Outside, the sky was brightening, sunlight spilling into the hall and casting the walls in gold. For the first time in months, the castle felt less oppressive, less like a prison, and more like a place that had tested them, tempered them, and set them free. The Alpha King's voice called softly from the dais. "Remember, the shadows never leave those who walk in my realm. But you have shown that even in darkness, hearts can endure and triumph." She smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the steady presence of her mate beside her. Freedom had been claimed, love had survived, and courage had prevailed. Yet, deep within the castle, in the corners where shadows still lingered, the magic pulsed quietly, alive and aware. The king watched, silent, as the pair began to leave the hall. There was respect in his gaze now, tempered by an understanding that even the strongest rulers must bow, in some measure, to the power of heart and will. The woman squeezed her mate's hand. "We are free," she whispered again. A vow and a promise carried by the wind. Her mate nodded, his eyes reflecting the strength and love that had grown between them. "Yes. And we will never forget what we survived, nor what we fought for." Together, they stepped into the light, leaving the shadows of the hall behind but carrying the lessons, scars, and courage of their journey with them. The Alpha King remained, silent and contemplative, a figure of power and enigma, knowing that his influence had shaped them but could not bind the true strength of hearts. United by love and determination, the castle exhaled, the lingering magic settling into stillness. And though the shadows remained in corners, in whispers, and in memory, the two of them walked forward, free at last, stronger than they had ever been, ready to face whatever the world beyond the hall held. Cliffhanger, epilogue tease. As they left the hall, her mate paused and glanced back. The Alpha King's figure lingered in the shadows of the dais, watching them go. His eyes glimmered with something that was neither anger nor approval, but a quiet question. Will they endure beyond my realm? Or will the shadows find them once more? The woman squeezed her mate's hand. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together. The castle behind them was no longer a prison. It was a memory, a lesson, and a testament to the power of love, courage, and the human heart.